Hello, I am Martin Nichols, Poultry Development Manager from Vitam International. Joining us today is Julia Lorraine from Allmix, as well as Dr. Tobias Steiner from Phytobiotics. We will be doing a discussion on mycotoxins and the impact of it on gut health and overall gut health and inflammation. Julia, mycotoxins are a hot topic these days. With regards to different animal stages, how's the sensitivity of the animals and how would we approach it?
When we talk about mycotoxins, all animals are not sensitive the same way. The breeding animals, such as sows, breeder poultry, and the young animals, such as the young poultry and the piglets, are the most sensitive animals. This is why when we look at the mycotoxin risk in raw materials and in the feed, we first look at the risk for this type of animals, the younger one and the breeding animals that are the most sensitive to mycotoxins.
What are the most contaminated raw materials in South Africa?
When we talk about mycotoxin risk in raw materials, the risk is very different from one raw material to another. The most risky raw materials is maize, and especially the maize derivatives, byproduct, such as OmniChop and DDGS can be very, very contaminated. But we find more often mycotoxins in maize. Then we can also find often mycotoxins in small cereals and small cereals byproducts, such as, for instance, wheat bran or wheat barley. Rapeseed and soy meals are less contaminated. We normally don't find important contamination in these materials. So the really big risk often comes from maize. We can have mycotoxins in other raw materials, but in average it's really from the maize that we find it most frequently.
You mentioned different mycotoxins. So which ones are the major mycotoxins that we find in raw materials in South Africa?
In South Africa, the major mycotoxin that we find is deoxynivalenol and its derivatives, such as 15-acetylidone and nivalenol, but the derivatives are less frequent. The major mycotoxin is really the deoxynivalenol. That we also can find zearalenone as well, but it is less frequent, as we can also find fumonizins when there is very hot temperature. Some years we have fumonizins. Aflatoxins and ochratoxins are far less frequent comparing to those first mycotoxins.
When we talk about toxin binders, we often find clay and yeast cell wall in these products. How are these molecules adapted to managing mycotoxins?
In fact, in all toxin binder we find clays. Clays are aluminosilicates that have a good capacity to bind aflatoxin. Nevertheless, the mycotoxins that we find in South Africa, especially the deoxynivalenol and the fumonizins, are far too big to fit inside the clay. So using a basic clay in South Africa is not efficient enough to protect the animals from the mycotoxin risk that we have in South Africa. Yeast cell wall are very good ingredients to bind zearalenone or ochratoxins. But you have to keep in mind that when we have zearalenone, we always have deoxynivalenol with it. So using a product based on clay and or yeast cell wall won't protect the animals towards deoxynivalenol and its derivatives.
What type of toxin binder would you then recommend?
I think there are two major qualities for a toxin binder, especially for South Africa. The first one is to be able to bind deoxynivalenol and its derivatives. And the second one is to have a wide spectrum binder. Why? Because even if deoxynivalenol is a major mycotoxin, we can also have other mycotoxins such as zearalenone and fumonizin from time to time. And we cannot always detect it, so it's very important to have a wide spectrum toxin binder to make sure that you always have the proper solution in the feed to protect your animals.
Thank you, Julia. Tobias, so we now know that mycotoxins are a problem in South Africa, and part of our production systems, it can cause some damage to the gut. And how do you see us protecting the gut, the importance of gut health in South African production systems?
Well, indeed, gut health is a major topic in modern animal production systems, also in South Africa. But before being able to understand its importance, I think we should define gut health. And unfortunately, there's no straightforward dictionary definition of gut health. But we may argue that gut health is based on 4 principles. And the first one being efficient digestion of feed and high absorption rates of nutrients. The second one being normal and stable commensal microbiota. And the third one, since the gut is the major entrance gate for toxins and pathogens into the body, is a solid physical gut barrier function. And last but not least, fourth, gut health requires a functioning and balanced immune system, because the gut is the biggest immune organ in the body.
Thank you. So if the gut is compromised and the gut barrier is broken, what's the implication of that?
First of all, gut health can be compromised by various stresses, like weaning of piglets, for instance, or transportation, or vaccination stress. That all causes a disruption in gut health, and this disruption can be mild, like subclinical, but it can also be clinical, like, for example, when infectious agents are entering into the body. A common principle of the body is to react with inflammation. And inflammation is an important defense mechanism of the body, but it's also very costly, and it destabilizes the animal and finally will compromise health, well-being, and performance, and in the end of the day, the profitability of any animal production business.
What's the impact of inflammation?
Well, as said, inflammation is very costly. It costs energy, amino acids and other nutrients to mount that inflammatory response, which is a very broad and unspecific response. And what will happen in the gut is that the integrity of the intestinal tissue is compromised. So the small tight junctions that normally stick together, the enterocytes, will be disintegrated. They will be opening up, and that is a path for antigens, for toxins, for pathogens to enter into the body. And that can cause a systemic effect. So we might go from a local inflammatory response to a systemic inflammatory reaction. And this destabilizes the whole organism and makes it more risky for the animal, because secondary infections can occur much easier in such an inflammatory situation.
Okay, so from phytobiotics, do you have research where you look at compromised gut health and maybe have a solution for it?
We have plenty of research on gut health with our botanical solutions that we have developed in the last years. And one particular topic that we addressed most recently was the impact of heat stress. And in these scientific studies that were published just last year, we could see that in broiler chickens or grower-finisher pigs, heat stress really had that negative impact. First of all, on feed intake, but second, on gut integrity, and finally on performance. And when we used a product like Sangrovit, for example, we could see that part of these detrimental effects could be compensated for. And that is a solution that has been tested and verified across different monogastric species, including chickens and turkeys and all sorts of pigs.
Thank you, Tobias, and thank you, Julia, for your valuable insights. That brings us to the end of our discussion. We now understand that we shouldn't underestimate mycotoxins and the role they play in gut health. We should also consider inflammation and the role it plays in production losses. Should you be interested in the topics of gut health and mycotoxins, please feel free to contact Vitam International. Please join us for the next video in our series. Goodbye.